you talk about like the cost of building things, I wish I could remember. I don't know if it's here in Europe, but like I think the cost of building nuclear power plants, I'd read that a big factor into this is like fighting activists and everything because there's so much that goes into like the public pushback.
Yeah.
I mean, even for things like the Keystone Pipeline and everything, like the amount of pushback on every single square meter that this pipe might run under and everything
hmm
else is
Yeah, and
yeah.
I'm not an expert on nuclear. The one thing I'll say is that first, you're absolutely right that a lot of the cost of nuclear, the reason why nuclear seems to be so much more expensive
I think
than like
natural
solar
gas is like the
or wind
big
or whatever,
competer, but
is because of fighting activists and because of how long the process takes. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC, is the regulatory body that kind of lords over nuclear. And for the last 30 years, in function, their role has been to prevent any nuclear power from being developed. We had a bunch that we developed like back in the 60s and 70s, and then we just had like no new plants for decades. The other thing that I'll say is that because of that gap where we just prevented anything from being built, we lost a lot of the knowledge. And that's also why it's expensive. Somewhere like France that just kept building nuclear power plants kept, pushing their costs down because they were continually training people who would know how to build it, who would know how to run it. Every time they built it, it got a little bit cheaper. There's, gains from learning. But if you build a bunch in the 60s and 70s and you go 20 years without building, then all the engineers who knew how to do the stuff have retired, and you've got to train an entirely new generation of people, and you lost all that learning. Like that's part of it as well. So I not an expert on like nuclear power, but in general, I think this is just a thing that happens all over America, and it's one of the things that we are passionate about is kind of freeing the economy from the red tape that it's in without having to go like full Ron Paul libertarianism or whatever. So yeah, it's just a something I can obviously talk about.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm
I'm
so
very
curious
passionate
because
about.
if we zoom back out, the goal is to obviously change the trajectory of democratic politics. And so, if we talk about, for example, getting out of the way for business to be successful, how do you recommend? Like, do you recommend that Democrats like slash down all these groups that are environmentalist groups and all sorts of things? Like, how do you recommend the Democrats go through if they've got all this bureaucratic sludge to clean it up without losing basically what in many ways would probably make the state blue, which is caring about environmentalism and caring about, like low income individuals that would be disproportionately affected by ugly, unsightly structures being zoned in their areas and not rich
Yeah.
people's areas.
So there's two things I would say to this. I would say that in terms of environmentalism, we've got to switch the environmental movement's focus. They've got to stop being focused on like save this little, three-toed, the three-footed nematode or whatever it is. That kind of environmentalism just I'm sure that the three-footed nematode is a very cute little animal. Somebody's probably posting like links to it in chat because maybe it actually exists, but it doesn't matter when you're talking about climate change. Climate change and the impact climate change will have will, cause the extinction of 100 other, different types of animals and plants and whatever. We've got to stop caring about like these very weird localized things because this absolutely happens. One of the foundational laws of environmentalism is called the National Environmental Protection Act. It's NEPA. And the average length of a NEPA review when you are required to get an environmental impact statement is what the thing is called. Those average environmental impact statements, if I'm getting the statistics right, I think they average 660 pages and 4.5 years to complete. And this is for like anything. For this could be to build a solar plant, but some group sues and says, well, the solar plant will actually displace a herd of sheep or something. And so you've got to do a 600-page report that will take you several years. And we've just got to get the environmentalists to realize, look, climate change is the overriding thing here. That's what we have to care about more than anything else. We've got to build this energy. And we just have to set that as a priority above the sheep or above the nematodes. In terms of housing, that's also an environmental issue because when you build dense housing and you have dense cities, that's way more environmentally friendly than suburban sprawl. Dense housing is kind of de facto environmentally friendly. People create these kind of heat maps of who uses the most carbon in like say a metro area, and wherever the housing is densest, that's where they use the least carbon because they do less driving, and when they do drive, they drive shorter distances, and so I think we have to there's ways we can kind of align progressive goals like fighting climate change, helping, poor people, with the idea that we can get the government out of the way and those things can still happen.
Sure. I think that's really interesting. I guess when I think about this, when you said like environmentalists are focused on like the cute nematode instead of global warming, obviously as like an unschooled internet person, all I hear about is global warming, and I don't really hear about the specifics, which makes me wonder. There's a really good article by Scott Alexander where he talks about, it's called Criticisms of Criticisms,
Hmm.
and he talks about basically how you need to move between macro and micro criticisms. And I like the lens because it makes you think about policy at macro and like narratives at macro and at the micro. And so when you're talking about like environmentalists fixating on the wrong thing, I'd be curious to know, like, I bet you the nematode environmentalists who are stopping the solar panels probably also tweet and post and are concerned about
Sure.
energy, but they're just also concerned in the local areas because it's impacting them locally. And so they're like, well, how do I put these? Like, it's like a priority issue, you know?
So if we zoom out, if we look at the micro versus the micro is that we've got a bunch of disorganized groups all around the country. A lot of times these lawsuits comes from very local groups. This is not like Bernie Sanders is suing to stop a solar plant, but the Sierra League, or the Sierra Club, I'm sorry, of Vermont very much has sued to stop those kind of projects. Local Sierra clubs, local just Audubon societies, and these are things they can't be centrally controlled. It's not like the Democratic Party can just put out a message that says never do that again, guys, and they'll just do it. No, they're autonomous and they'll do what they want. And so that's the micro. The macro is that we have a system that some people have called a vetocracy, which is that there's way too many veto points in our bureaucracy, that there's way too many opportunities to just stop something from happening. It's way too easy to file a lawsuit. There's too many regulations that allow you to do so. And so it's very easy for little micro groups like that to sue and stop something, or demand that there be an environmental impact statement that will take several years, or just make different demands for community input. And we have such a vetocracy in so many different ways that the macro level picture is we've got to solve the vetocracy. We've got to, do permitting reform so that it's just faster to build stuff. It's faster to build, whether it's semiconductor plants, whether it's green energy, whether it's new housing, whether it's nuclear plants, whether it's, anything at all. It's got to be faster to build. And that to me just seems like a win-win. Everybody wants more stuff. Everybody wants there to be, more technology and better technology and cleaner energy and more abundant energy and more cheaper housing where we pay less for rent. Regardless of your ideology, everybody thinks those are good things. It's just a matter of how do we get them.
I feel like the problem is the opposite. The way that you say that on the micro level it's disorganized, and on the macro level there's other issues. I feel like the issue is on the micro level. I think it's a lot easier to organize. I'm kind of saying the same thing in the opposite words, but on a micro level, it's very easy to see one particular problem and then gear an organization or a lawsuit around
It's
fixing
easy
that
to
one particular.
coordinate, you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy to focus and fix it on one thing. But then on the macro level, like if I've got the choice between demonstrating to prevent a pipeline or to save a particular animal or whatever, it's very easy to get engaged with that. But if I want to fix global warming, I've got Twitter and Facebook, and that's about it. I don't know where you plug in for that. So I feel like the plug-in points on the local level are a lot easier for people to have that concentrated effort to do a particular thing. But then on the macro level, it just feels kind of lost sometimes.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. There's global warming is a decades long, high visibility fight, but it's the kind of thing where, if you pass a law, it's not like you can see the law working. You've just got to wait. Hopefully the climate will get hotter
Stuff
at
does
a slower
change.
rate.
People
Yeah.
feel like that all of the environmental problems are completely intractable, and we've made really big progress in certain areas, and people just don't realize it as much. I didn't go to LA as a child, but I heard that like the smog alerts and everything in LA used to be like unlivable back
Yeah.
in the 90s and stuff, and that massively got taken back by different regulations and restrictions. One of the reasons why California has so many different restrictions on stuff related to pollution and everything.
Yeah.
Or when we were growing up, you mentioned that we weren't really talking about climate change. There were two things we were talking about though. One was acid rain. And I
Acid
remember
rain.
when that was supposed to destroy the whole planet, where all the rain was going to be like the blood from aliens. And the second thing we talked about over Australia, I think, was the hole in the ozone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so funny. So there's an article I wrote, I think it was for the Bulwark, called Progressives Have Turned into Processives.
Mhm.
They care about process more than progress. But those are the central examples that I use in the article. And look, I think that like the environmental movement, which I'm criticizing now, it genuinely did have some big wins. These are, we fixed acid rain. We fixed it, by the way, with a market mechanism. We did a cap and trade system for the particular chemicals that were causing it, and just limited it to a certain amount, capped it, and you can, blah, blah, blah. But it was a very market-oriented system, and it worked. And within like 3 or 4 years, boom, done. Like, that's a clear win for the environmentalists. The hole in the ozone layer is not entirely closed, but it is definitely healing. We banned, I think they're called chlorofluoro.
It's like
something.
CFCs or something.
CFCs,
Yeah.
chlorofluoroclides or something like that. I'm not a chemist. But yeah, we banned those chemicals, and the ozone layer is healing. Even the whales, to some extent, not all the whales, but like some of the species of whales actually have been saved. So like we've had big wins. Cleveland's river doesn't set itself on fire anymore. Like, good job, Cleveland. And so recognizing that we've had those wins, I want us to be able to shift into a different mode of like the build baby build of environmentalism, where we can just a buttload of solar, power and wind power and battery technology. And, the thing is, if we do, like, the technology part of it has been solved so hard. Solar power costs literally less than 1% of what it cost 20 years ago. Like the price declines on solar and wind have been insane. We're not just getting clean energy. It's also going to be the cheapest energy anywhere in the world very, very fast. And battery technology to store all that solar is also getting really, really, more efficient at a startling pace. Like, technologically, we've kind of technologied our way into a solution to all of this.
We just have to have
and we're just not doing it.
Implement the, yeah.
So yeah.